Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome back to Seed to Plate channel. My name is Brooke and today we're going deep. We're getting in there because I went down a rabbit hole and I feel like I just need to share it with every single person I come in contact with. That's an exaggeration, but I'm glad you're here. All right, y'all, so today's video is about what the heck all of these words mean on seed packets. Now, it is seed starting season. I am in Texas Zone 8B. And just as a quick intro, my name is Brooke. This is Seed to Plate channel where we talk all things urban and suburban gardening. I am not a full-time gardener homesteader. I have a full-time corporate job. I just think gardening is super fun. I really gel with it and I've been making content for years. So would love if you subscribed. My Instagram is down below. If you just want to catch me when the algorithm decides it's an appropriate time, that's cool too. Hit the thumbs up button, but your support does go a long way. So today I was gonna do a cute little fun video about all these words and what they mean. Well, then my advertising brain kicked in because I used to be in the advertising business. And in the advertising business, you have to really understand what kind of claims you can and can't make and what is regulated and what is not regulated. So as I started Googling around the interwebs, I realized there's a decent amount of words, and especially some really big words that we utilize a lot in the gardening space, that don't actually have qualified meanings. It's really just one word. The rest of them do have regulated meanings for seed packets. I just went down the rabbit hole and did basically a full investigative report. I literally read legislation. I read it word for word at 4 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't sleep. So we're all gonna talk about it. Now, I will give my thoughts on how I approach seed buying at the end, and actually nothing that I discovered in this investigative report actually is gonna change how I approach seed buying. I'm still gonna buy seeds the same way, but let's get started. I did cite all of my sources down in the description box. I would appreciate if you do leave a comment, make sure it is constructive and informed. If it is nasty or disrespectful, it will be disrespectfully deleted. So, love you, mean it. I just like to keep this a very safe and productive space for all parties involved. That's you, that's me, that's us, that's people who find this video in 5 years. Cool, glad we got the rules of engagement out of the way. Let's jump in. I also put little chapters down below for which word if you want to jump around. So I just kind of picked some of the heavy hitters. Now, the first one we're gonna start with, we're just gonna get the serious stuff out of the way right out of the gate, okay? What does heirloom mean? It's not your grandma's brooch, okay? That's not what we're talking about here. This is the one term that is not regulated that shocked me, that I could not find a regulation around using the term heirloom variety, okay? There are regulations via the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. There are regulations about marketing. Basically what you can and can't say about your seeds, specifically vegetable seeds. We're not talking about agriculture farmer seeds. That's a whole different subject that I tried to go down that rabbit hole and I said, I don't need to find the rabbit that bad. So with vegetable seeds, there are marketing regulations. This word heirloom, not regulated. There is no official meaning for heirloom. There's just not. So there's kind of some firm ideas within the gardening community about what it means, but it's not a regulated term. Now, before we go further down this rabbit hole, I am gonna say the word regulation a lot, and I wanna make sure it's very well understood early on in this video that regulations at this level protect us, the consumers, right? Because if we didn't have these types of regulations, we could just get sold anything and the companies that are selling it would have no accountability. Now, I don't own a seed company. I don't know what the ins and outs of adhering to those regulations are, I'm just telling you, we're just spitting facts over here, okay? So, I went and I started doing research. Now, the Seed Savers Exchange is generally regarded as a really good authority on seeds, especially heirloom seeds, okay? So I'm gonna read off something, so I'm not gonna be looking at the camera, don't be alarmed. The Seed Savers Exchange defines heirloom. It describes a seed's heritage, specifically a documented heritage of being passed down from generation to generation within a family or community. An heirloom variety of vegetable, fruit, or flower must be open pollinated, we'll get to that in a little bit, or pollinated by insects, birds, wind, or other natural means, and breed true, or retain its original traits from one generation to the next. While some organizations label seeds as heirloom according to dates, for example, a variety that dates back more than 5 decades, Seed Savers Exchange identifies heirlooms by verifying and documenting the generational history of preserving and passing on the seed, emphasizing the seed's tie to a specific group of people. I've said this book so many times on this channel. This is the book Epic Tomatoes, and it's written by Craig LaHoulier, who left a comment on my video one time, and I almost peed my pants. But this goes through a lot of different heirloom varieties of tomatoes. So going back to this like definition of heirloom, okay, we're gonna break this down in a few different ways. So there's a couple ways to define this. Okay, they have to be open pollinated, which means that they are pollinated by insects, birds, wind, or other natural means. So you cannot closed pollinate this. You cannot manipulate the pollination in any way. Now, when it says breeds true, what that means, and we'll get into this conversation a little bit more when we talk about hybrids, that means that if I take a seed out of a tomato, let's just go with Cherokee Purple because we're going to use that as an example. If I grow the tomato and then I take the seed and I save them, it means that the seed that I plant from that tomato will give me an identical Cherokee Purple tomato. Okay, that's what breeds true means. Now, the heritage part is the part where I'm going to use this example, okay? I'm not gonna read it word for word because that's called intellectual property infringement and that's called copyright, and honestly, you should just buy this book anyway. It is the story of Marshall Cletus Biles of Logan, West Virginia, and it takes place in the early 1930s. With absolutely no experience breeding or growing tomatoes, Mr. Biles had a goal of developing the largest, most delicious tomato possible. His unorthodox breeding technique involved using German Johnson beefsteak and unknown Italian and English tomato varieties as a starting point. He planted the tomatoes in a circle with German Johnson in the middle, surrounded by several of each of the other varieties. With a baby syringe, he applied pollen from the edge varieties onto flowers of the central German Johnson, saving seeds from the tomatoes that formed from the cross-pollinated German Johnson blossoms. At this point, this is a hybrid, okay? We're gonna get into hybrids in a minute. And once he was happy with the results, he sold plants for $1 each, thereby paying off his $6,000 mortgage in 6 years. But when we talk about heritage, that's what we're talking about. We're able to trace back the heritage of the plant, of the seed, of the variety, whatever we wanna call it, to a certain point. Sometimes we can't trace it back to a certain point. The Cherokee Purple is a good example. Cherokee Purple were thought to have originated with the Cherokee indigenous peoples of America, Native Americans, and then passed along. That's how they got their name, Cherokee Purple. Nobody's able to actually point to like a year and say that's what happened. That's the idea of what happened. So that's what happens when we talk about heritage, okay? So you might have noted earlier that I said in that mortgage lifter example that it started off as a hybrid, okay? And then it became an heirloom. That speaks to the ability to stabilize that breed, right? So it started as a hybrid and then it was stabilized over the years to where you could get the same plant over and over and over and over again. That is an heirloom from my research, okay? Please note that this term is not regulated. So anybody could put heirloom on anything and they wouldn't have to account for that in any way, shape, or form. Do I think, well, we'll talk about what I think later. Never mind. Okay, so next let's talk about hybrid because I mentioned it a couple of times when we were talking about heirlooms. So hybridization is like, if you remember Punnett squares, okay? If you remember Punnett squares in science class, that's what we're talking about. genes from one thing, genes from another thing, putting them together, right? Just like, maybe this is a weird example. I got my mom, I got my dad. I don't look like either of them. And my kids won't look like either of me. So when we're talking about hybrids, we're truly talking about taking two plants, putting them together, growing the seed, okay? When we grow that seed, we get that plant when we have a hybrid. So a good kind of way to think about this is some hybrids like determinate. A lot of your paste tomatoes are gonna be hybrids. We'll talk about the advantages of hybrids in a second. So when we're talking about hybrids, your determinate tomatoes are a lot going to be hybrids. Now, if you save that seed from that hybrid tomato and grow it next year, you may or may not get the same exact type of tomato. You're gonna get something. You're gonna get a tomato, but it's not a stabilized variety like an heirloom is, okay? So when we're talking about saving seeds from your own garden, saving seeds from hybrids is generally not recommended. Again, you can totally do it. You're still gonna get something. It's just not gonna be the same thing that you got before. So the reason that you have a hybrid over an heirloom, let's just call it, hybrids can be specifically bred to have certain characteristics, right? So hybrids can be bred, for example, to be more disease resistant. They can be bred to have bigger fruit. They can be bred to have smaller leaves. They can be bred, micro tomatoes is a really good example. Micro tomatoes are bred to be like this real small, minimal foliage, maximum tomatoes. Okay, so hybrids, GMOs, not the same thing. And we'll talk about why in a minute, okay? But just remember, hybrid is two plants that come together, you can't save the seeds. Heirloom, stabilized variety, you can save the seeds. Now, I prefer, as an example, to go with a hybrid variety for my paste tomatoes because it's more of a guarantee that I'm going to get those tomatoes and that I'm going to get a certain yield of those tomatoes. So from the perspective of the seed company, selling hybrids has two main advantages, and this is from the USDA website, okay? Two main advantages. I'm gonna read again. First, simple examination of a hybrid seed does not reveal its lineage, thus offering companies proprietary control over the seeds that they develop, because only they know how they did it. It's not like an heirloom where you can just have the seed and it's given to you from your neighbor and you get the exact same thing, okay? Second, the enhanced vigor of hybrid seed is not transmitted to its offspring, thereby requiring farmers to buy new seed every year to ensure continued vigor. Crops cultivated from seeds saved from a hybrid crop grown in the previous year are typically less vibrant and significantly lower in yield. So, the advantage for seed companies of creating and selling hybrids, and this is probably more on like a farm level than like a vegetable garden level, but the advantage for seed companies is, one, they have proprietary control over that exact seed. So if I'm a farmer and I grow tomatoes, because we're just gonna keep using that as an example, and I buy from Brooks Seed Company and I get a great yield, I'm gonna continue to go back year after year because those seeds aren't stabilized, and I'm going to continue to purchase those seeds specifically, right? So that's kind of the deal with hybrids. And it happens in the vegetable garden too. I have seeds that are hybrids that I swear by. I will continue to go back and buy them over and over and over and over again because I know that they work for me. So we covered hybrid, we covered heirloom. Now I think it's important to move into GMO because hybrids are not GMOs, okay? Hybrids can be bred with specific characteristics. So if I take one tomato that is really meaty, and I take one tomato that's yellow, and I cross-pollinate them, and I create a hybrid for a meaty yellow tomato, that's a hybrid, okay? GMO stands for genetically modified organism. Now, long and short of GMOs for the home vegetable gardener is like, don't worry about it. Which I know sounds weird because I've literally done this whole investigative report and now I'm telling you to just like ignore it. Home gardeners cannot access genetically modified seeds. Like, it's not a thing that can even occur. You need certain licenses, certifications to even buy genetically modified seed, okay? Now, just because I'm telling you not to worry about it doesn't mean we're not gonna define it. Now, everybody has their opinions on GMOs. It's not something you're gonna hear me sharing on this channel. That is not going to be part of what I think about the stuff later, because you can't buy GMO seeds. So like, it's irrelevant to this conversation. However, an example of a GMO plant, and again, reading a definition from the USDA website, okay? An example of a GMO plant is one that is engineered to produce BT. We all know what BT is, against worms. BT is a type of bacteria that kills worms that are gonna try and eat it. Another more sinister example is one that can tolerate glyphosate when they spray it on fields. So glyphosate is an herbicide, which means it kills weeds. Now, they have genetically modified some plants to be resistant to glyphosate, so it actually won't kill them. Because if you spray weed killer that you just buy at the store, that's killing everything. That weed killer is going to kill every plant that it touches. The chemical doesn't know which is and is not a good plant. Like, that doesn't make sense. So they have to genetically engineer these plants so that they can kill the weeds and still get their yield, but not kill the plant. So that is kind of the long and short of GMO for the home gardener. Again, don't worry about it. It doesn't impact you if you're just buying vegetable seeds for your backyard. Don't worry about GMOs, and hybrids and GMOs are not the same thing. They are very, 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 very different, okay? Okay, so let's go to everybody's least favorite word, organic. Favorite or least favorite, I don't know. I feel like organic gets a bad rap because I think we think of organic as being expensive, which it can be at the store. I think we think of organic as being high maintenance. Really, at the end of the day, you could probably classify most of the stuff I grow as organic because I don't really spray chemicals, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm gonna read you the definition. Again, this is from the USDA. For a seed packet to be labeled USDA or organic, the parent plant must be raised in soil that has been certified organic and has followed government-specific organic standards for more than 3 years. This is defined by non-use of synthetic substances for pest and weed management. There's really long lists of non-approved substances, and organic is defined by the non-use of GMOs. So again, just another reason to not worry about GMOs. Now, organic, when we're talking about organic soil, that means that the plant that you got the seed from, because every plant has seeds, well, almost every plant, if you let it grow long enough. So let's use a different example. Let's use lettuce, okay? We've all had lettuce that has bolted, and what bolted is when it shoots up that center stalk and sends out seeds. So your original plant, because the part of the lettuce that you eat is the leaves, okay? So your original plant starts out in the soil. That soil that the original parent plant starts out in has to follow organic gardening practice or farming, gardening, whatever practices for at least 3 years, okay? Now, then your lettuce, which you eat the leaves, it's gonna send up its center stalk, boop, and then it's going to create seeds. That is the seed that you buy, okay? That's how we get seeds to plant for our own gardens. So, organic, again, I'll give all my thoughts later. I feel like I keep wanting to give my opinion now. Now, we defined open pollinated earlier, so I'm not gonna go back over that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Open pollinated is basically it was pollinated by nature. If it exists out your back door and it pollinates stuff, wind, bugs, birds, it's open pollinated. Most seeds that you get are going to be open pollinated, and I can only imagine it's because trying to force pollinate stuff is just a lot of work, right? Now, your hybrids are probably not open pollinated. Probably not, because they have to force a certain pollination between two plants to get the seed. All right, y'all. Now, the other thing that you're always going to see on seed packets are germination rates, okay? Now, germination rates are regulated. They absolutely are regulated. And that is to protect you, the consumer, from buying bad seed or buying seed that just doesn't grow. So those germination rates, there are specific numbers that they have to adhere to for certain vegetables. So those are there. I don't really pay attention to them, especially because they are federally regulated. So like they have to have a certain germination to like be sold anyway. I don't really worry about germination rates. The last thing that isn't really a definition, but I do want to review it really quick, is some of the planting instructions that you're going to get on the back of your seed packet, okay? So this is a Baker Creek seed packet. All the seed packets are different, okay? So you're gonna get different amounts of information. You're gonna get different information everywhere, okay? But let's talk about it real quick. So for example, we'll just use Baker Creek as an example. There's a few things on here. Sprouts in the amount of days, okay? There is an ideal temperature. There's seed depth, plant spacing, frost hardy, and minimum sun requirement, okay? So just as an example, this is a poblano pepper. So it says it sprouts in 7 to 10 days. That is going to depend on your temperature. Ideal temp, 70 to 95 degrees, yes. Seed depth, 1/4 of an inch. I'm gonna do a more detailed video next week about like how I go about planting seed or starting seeds. Plant spacing, this is the one I really want to talk about, okay? Plant spacing, a lot of the times on seed packets, can be stretched. And I mean, not stretched out, shrunk. You can plant your plants a lot closer together than what your seed packet's gonna tell you, okay? This is 18 inches. Your pepper plant does not need 18 inches. I do mine 12 inches apart and you can get a lot more for the space. So plant spacing on seed packets is usually based on like farms and not necessarily home gardens. But for their success, it's going to be a lot better if you plant your plants farther apart because then they're not gonna have any issues. Frost hardy, that one's not difficult. Definitely not. Minimum full sun, 8 to 12 hours. You can also kind of shrink the sun requirement. I would say the absolute minimum amount of sun for something that's considered full sun is 7 hours. I've still had success with that, but as with all plants, the more sun, the better. Now, the other planting instructions that you'll get on here, they're very good. They're helpful. However, I would highly encourage doing some research about your zone. I would highly encourage finding a community of people who also garden in your zone, and not even like in your zone. For example, I'm in zone 8B. There's also people in like freaking Oregon who are in zone 8B. And it's 70 degrees here today and sunny. I doubt it's 70 degrees and sunny in Oregon. So not only your zone, but like your local geographic area. Make sure you get a lot of information about that specifically. So just as an example, planting instructions: start indoors in bright light 8 to 12 weeks before last frost date. Heat map helps to warm soil and speed germination. Peppers often appreciate a bit of afternoon shade during the hottest summer months. So this isn't like a crazy amount of information. I think the botanical interest seed packets are definitely the most aggressive in terms of information that they give you. Just know that like the planting instructions can be variable. Okay, so now here's the juicy part. Now you get to know what I think about all of these things. And if you don't care, that's cool too. I hope you leave a like or subscribe or do something. But here's how I approach seed buying. And if you watched my last video about like what seeds I'm growing and all that stuff, you'll know I buy from a lot of different seed companies, like a lot. I really like some heirloom varieties, especially like tomatoes, okra, and I like the story, but I really, really like flavor. Now, something that you're gonna find between heirlooms and hybrids is there's way more variety in heirlooms. There's just a lot more variety in heirlooms than hybrids. And I, as somebody who's very motivated by like cooking really delicious food, I like growing heirlooms for that reason. Now, hybrids, if I have something where I like need determinate tomatoes, great example. I need a specific amount of determinate tomatoes to do the canning that I want to do this year. The other thing with hybrids, a lot of people will do like hybrid lettuce, hybrid carrots, something that's just like a really standard kind of situation. Now, in terms of organic, with organic growing, I am far more concerned about my organic gardening practices than if my seeds came from an organic source. And let me explain. From the research I've done, I do not believe that seeds grown in non-organic soil practices are any better or worse than organic seeds. That's from the research I've done. If you have done different research, you go do your thing, okay? So I don't pay the extra amount for organic seed. I just don't. Sometimes I will like accidentally get an organic, or the variety that I want happens to be organic, but I am way more concerned about the way that I grow that seed organically in my garden. So like when I'm growing a seed in my garden, I don't want to use pesticides. I don't really want to use synthetic fertilizers. I want to use like natural blood meal, bone meal, stuff like that. Have I used synthetic fertilizers in the past when my plants are like about to die? Yes. Do I have any issues with that? No. So certainly for me, I'm much more of like a middle ground person, but I don't really care that much about buying organic seed. It just doesn't really do much for me. Now, open pollinated, again, don't really pay attention to it. Don't care. GMOs, I already told you not to worry about, and germination rates, I also just don't worry about. So really, for me and my thoughts and opinions, the heirloom and hybrid situation is definitely an interesting one. Last year was my first year growing hybrids with the determinate tomatoes that I did grow, and I was just so pleased. I mean, so pleased with it that I really leaned into more hybrids this year, especially for my determinate tomatoes. So I really hope this video was helpful. I know that I enjoyed doing the research to make this video, so thanks so much for watching. Happy gardening, and we'll see you next week to start some seeds.